Okay, here we've got some tomatoes. These are actually outdoor varieties we're trying to grow indoors. And the first problem we're having with them is they're getting quite a lot of mildew on the leaves. This is really only an indoor problem on tomato varieties. This isn't blight. It's just that they're not particularly resistant varieties, and greenhouse tomatoes are selected to be resistant to that. The other thing we've got is we've got very thin tips. So this tip here should be really thick, and that's probably because the tomatoes haven't been fed enough. So, and not with tomato feed. When the tips get thin like that, you really want nitrogen, so chicken manure.
If you don't have chicken manure, what can you use? Grass seed.
Grass clippings you could use, but it'll take a bit longer to become active. Urine. You can whittle in a bucket and use that. That'll work. Just don't do it neat. That's full of nitrogen. That's urea, so that's really, really good. What else can I say? Yeah. Also with tomatoes, if you look at these tomatoes, we've pruned them up a single. Oh, actually, in this case, 2 stems. We're pruning them up a single stem. So that means only letting the growing point grow and taking out all these side shoots which form between the leaf, this huge branch-like thing, and the main stem. So you just pinch those out. And that you need to do on a quite a regular basis, every few days. In hot weather, if the tomatoes, it's well fed, these things can turn into monsters almost overnight. Earlier in the season, things like this would have made really, really good transplants. So if you have a very, very early tomato plant, let's say started off in February, you can take cuttings off it if you need more plants. We did lots of our plants like that. Right. The other thing we're doing with these tomatoes is, because they're in small containers indoors, they're getting fed a lot. If they're outdoors on the ground, they've got a thick layer of compost, they're probably going to be okay. But indoors, they're going to need weekly or bi-monthly feeding. And that involves getting your bottle of tomato feed, diluting it down, not using it neat, as somebody mentioned, asked me today, and yeah, just feeding them. When you feed tomatoes, when you feed any plant, make sure the soil's moist before you feed them. And if you're using a dry feed like chicken manure, make sure you water in afterwards, because or else this is going to sit on the surface and do absolutely nothing. In fact, if it's dry feed, you might want to rake it into the top of the soil too, so it's a bit covered and in contact with the soil. Other things, some other tomato problems we've got which can happen. Right, the next one we've got, you can see it here, is incomplete ripening at the top of the fruit. This is green shank, and this is caused by it's basically a kind of sunburn. This tomato's been in a hot greenhouse in full sun. Had it been sheltered by the leaves, it would have been a lot happier. In fact, that's another thing, is people tend to be quite often overly keen on pruning out tomato leaves. And it's safe to prune out tomato leaves below a fruit, like below these fruit. You can, there's a bit of a leaf here, you could just pinch that off. But above a fruit, it's generally best to leave leaves because they're feeding the fruit below and they're helping them ripen. If you take leaves off a tomato, they're not going to taste as good. Late in the season, maybe September, if it's damp and wet, it's worth taking off more leaves outdoors because you're trying to minimise blight. But if you're growing tomatoes at this time of year or in a greenhouse, you really want to leave as much foliage on as you can, so long as you've got good air circulation around the plant. Something I forgot to mention is what kills tomatoes in the UK is indoors and out, isn't the cold generally, it's fungal diseases. So you want to do good air circulation. And that's basically the reason things are being pruned up a single stick. It allows the air to move around the plant. Tomatoes will crop much more heavily if you just let them sprawl all over the place and do their own thing. They know what they're doing, but in this climate, if you get a wet spell, you can end up with real problems. Your plants can just collapse overnight. So what would work in the Mediterranean doesn't necessarily work here.
So you get one single stick and string, and you twist the string round the plant.
Right. This is how Melanie's done them in here. There's all sorts of different ways of doing it.
Okay.
Seems to be working for now, but because it's a greenhouse, these tomatoes can get very, very large. It's only the beginning of July. These have got another 8 weeks of growing, and if they're fed well, they'll be growing a foot a week. So that gives you an idea of another 16 foot. There's a lot more growth to happen. There's another 8 foot worth of growth on these tomatoes.
Wow.
So this is not going to help with that. Really, we need to string them up to the ceiling. And then they're going to come down again or something. But we've got plenty of time to do that. This was a bit of a stopgap.
Okay.
Right. One other problem that can happen on tomatoes, essentially grown in containers, is blossom end rot. This is to do basically with erratic watering. These plants got a bit dry at a crucial stage, and the crucial stage was when the fruit was when the fruit was about that size, it was just a tiny little fruit just after the flower had finished. And if they get kind of have problems getting enough calcium at that point. They don't develop properly, and then as the fruit grows, the bottom end starts to die off. There's nothing
You can still eat that.
You can, but they don't taste nice.
Okay.
They have a tendency to ripen early. The simplest is just actually to pick these off the plant.
Okay.
Because it's just, then the plant can actually use its energy more productively somewhere else.
Okay.
What was I going to say about bottom end rot? Much less of a problem outdoors and almost never a problem on cherry tomatoes. It's a problem of basically plum tomatoes and generally larger tomatoes.